Donald Trump making an appearance at the UFC. His famed dance is getting all kinds of iterations in major sporting events, from the UFC champion to NFL and even college football. It's pretty fascinating to see what's happened over the weekend, but all of that's not the important stuff, guys. The important stuff is the president-elect continues to make appointments, and there's a timeline here, of course. He's going to take office January 20th. But what this ultimately looks like in Washington, D.C., let's talk now with the Center Square's reporter, Casey Harper, over in Washington, D.C. Casey, obviously, all eyes are on these nominations. We saw a whole bunch that were picked on last week, and even one big one announced yesterday to deal with the FCC. So give us a rundown here. What are we looking at, and what kind of timeline are we going to have to actually get some hearings on all of this?
Yeah, I mean, depending on where you're on the aisle, stand on the aisle, this is the Avengers assembling, right, to save the world, or this is Thanos and his minions getting ready to destroy the world, right, depending on the side of the aisle. But regardless, you cannot deny that there are some pretty interesting, pretty unorthodox picks. You mentioned the most recent, which is Brendan Carr to lead the FCC. But I think that was a little bit overshadowed by another pick this weekend, which was Doug Burgum, North Dakota governor, who's going to be leading the Department of Interior, but also a new commission, you could call it, because Trump kind of announces these agencies, but the president doesn't have authority to create an agency. So it's unclear exactly how this is going to work. Like the Department of Government Efficiency, he announced it, but Congress has to create that. But regardless, he has a lot of leeway within the administrative branch to do what he wants and needs to do. But Burgum is a really interesting pick for the economy, for Americans. It seems that Burgum's main goal is to get prices down for Americans. I like this pick. I think it's really interesting because it hits on something Trump really ran on the campaign trail, and that polling that we at the Center Square did and elsewhere did showed that Americans really cared about. They cared about high prices. Of course, since President Joe Biden took office, prices rose more than 20%. And in some goods and some food items, it rose much more than 20%. 20% is the average. And so 20% increase in 4 years was just too much for Americans to handle. I don't know, Greg, how much you go shopping. My wife does a lot of our shopping, but I do go as well. And some things are just so much more expensive. It's hard to fathom. Our grocery budget, it seems, has doubled since we got married. And I think a lot of Americans felt that as well. And so Burgum is going to try to get those prices down, specifically by addressing energy. He's going to drill more, open up more leasing, and that's going to lower the price of gas, but it also lowers the price of goods around the country because all goods have to be transported pretty much on 18-wheelers and other vehicles, for instance. So if you lower the cost of transporting goods, you can lower the cost of all goods. At least that's the pitch that Trump is making. But he's made a lot of other picks, some controversial ones. Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. I think he will get confirmed without problem. But Hegseth and Matt Gaetz to lead the Department of Justice, they're going to fight an uphill battle to get confirmation, and it's unclear if they'll get across the finish line.
Talking with Casey Harper, a reporter out of Washington, D.C. for the Center Square, keeping an eye on what's going on with the Trump administration incoming. Of course, nominations being made. I do want to touch on what the timeline looks like for this and what exactly is a recess appointment. Is that the track we're going to go, or is it going to be kind of more the traditional approach? But just focusing in on some of these more controversial picks. Obviously, Marco Rubio already has the blessing of Illinois U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, saying he's a worthy pick, and Durbin even saying that there are other worthy picks he's sure that Trump's going to make. But these more controversial ones, especially in certain key agencies, like former Fox News host, former veteran of the armed services, I believe saw several tours of war. Pete Hegseth, you got Matt Gaetz, who is a firebrand for kind of the anti-establishment conservative politics. Some other names out there, RFK Jr. as well. What is the former president signaling by getting these picks, these kind of anti-establishment, non-establishment types of nominations versus, say, hey, there's a Marco Rubio, or maybe he'll pick somebody else that's kind of out of that establishment wing?
Yeah, it's a great question, Greg. I think it is the question, and it signals different things to different people. I mean, to the base, it signals that Trump is not going to make the same mistakes that he did last time. Trump himself admitted last time around that he put the wrong people around him, and it really slowed down his agenda. That's basically the consensus of the Trump crowd, that Trump's downfall the first time around was that he was surrounded by saboteurs who didn't believe in his agenda, who were grifters, and who in the end delayed and sabotaged the whole thing. And so this time around, he's avoiding that. That's what it signals to his base. He's picking people who are extremely loyal to him, or people who are really going to shake things up, like Musk or RFK, who've clearly been burned by the Democratic establishment. Musk and RFK have been. Even Tulsi Gabbard has been burned, and even Democrats were calling Tulsi Gabbard a Russian asset. So though she used to be a Democrat, I don't think many people expect her to be secretly working for the Democratic Party
Well,
because
but
of
what's
how they
fascinating
treat.
is she wasn't just a former Democrat. I mean, she was like what, co-chair of the
Yeah,
DNC at one point. So
she was
clearly
a rising
somebody,
star in the party.
yeah, somebody who clearly got disenfranchised with how she claims to have seen the inner workings behind the scenes of the DNC, especially with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton and whatnot. So clearly a
Right.
message is being sent. What's the likelihood that, say, Matt Gaetz is going to be nominated or officially confirmed, or RFK Jr. is going to be confirmed? Can Republicans do this on their own, and is there any leeway to lose any of the GOP senators in this?
Well, there is a little bit of leeway to lose some senators, but picks like Gates are pretty controversial. I think he's going to lose more than a few senators. Gates has made a lot of enemies. Of course, he led the charge against getting House Speaker Kevin McCarthy ousted from his role, and led to that. If you remember those weeks of Republican infighting, and they didn't have a speaker, and they tried this person, and that was mostly Gates driving that. And eventually, they landed on Mike Johnson. So that tells you a little bit about Gates' willingness to buck the party, his willingness to upset people and not care about it, and that he's probably made some enemies within the party along the way. He also has some, allegations against him, ethics allegations that he's going to have to navigate. That's going to be pretty interesting and difficult for him. You mentioned recess appointments. I don't want to go so long into this, but essentially the founding fathers, great way to start a short answer. The founding fathers
That's right.
created, right,
Long
a
story
provision
short,
because, right, in 1787 the Constitution was written. The founding fathers created a provision where presidents could do recess appointments, where if Congress was out of session, they could have someone temporarily for like a year serve in a cabinet until Congress came back. Because back then, if people, when they went out for recess, I mean, they had to take a wagon or a horse-drawn buggy,
it was not the
days.
glamorous job that it is now.
Right.
That's for sure.
It took a long time to get to and from Washington. So recess was very much longer back then. Now it's much shorter. People are flying in and out. And there was a lot of recess appointments during the George W. Bush administration. During Bill Clinton, I believe, had almost 200. Obama had some, but then the Supreme Court said, hey, you're kind of abusing this. You can't just appoint people on the weekend and call it a recess appointment. And so ever since then, Congress has done these kind of fake sessions where every 10 days or so, within every 10 days, they go into session, even if they don't really do anything. Because the Supreme Court ruled if a recess is not more than 10 days, it doesn't count as a real recess. So now Congress never technically goes into recess for more than 10 days. But, Trump has both chambers. He could try to push for a real recess and ram all these through. It would be very controversial. It'd probably be challenged in court, but it might work.
Casey Harper, one last thing here. Obviously, the appointments are a big deal. We're going to hear a bunch more about this as he's got, oh my gosh, hundreds of people he's got to appoint. But what about the policies? You touched briefly on the energy stuff. You talked about the importance of bringing that down to help with the ongoing inflationary pressures. What are some of the other key things that you think are things that Trump can do pretty quick through executive action rather than having to wait on the legislative action to kick in?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the southern border. He appointed Tom Homan, the border czar. He's very aggressive on the border. He has a plan laid out. He's wanting to start deportations. There's no need for Congress to act on that. All the pieces are in place to start deportations, to close down the border immediately, to give Border Patrol the power they need. That was one of the biggest lies of the last few years from Democrats, that they needed some kind of congressional action to do something. It really wasn't true. The president had all the power all along to shut down the border. Of course, Congress has to give more funding, but funding's not really the issue. The policies in place are allowing migrants to come in. I mean, they're being caught and then released back into the country, right? So things like Remain in Mexico, other policies could be put in place immediately. I've covered at thecentersquare.com how ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, has been basically not deporting anyone except very severe criminals since Biden took office. And so you could give ICE the mandate to start deporting all criminals or different things. There's a lot of executive actions on the border that he could do. He's going to start on the energy thing, opening that up. And then, you've mentioned, you've heard many of his cabinet appointees talk about going off after woke policies in the administrative state. So I think that's a third thing that could start immediately, because Trump has pretty secure authority over these agencies to change them. And if Musk and Ramaswamy and these other picks, Hegseth has talked about rooting out wokeness in the military. If they're all really serious about that and they want to do it, they definitely can.
That's stuff that can happen pretty quick. Obviously, some of the other tax provisions, the extension of the tax cuts from the first Trump administration, the no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime. Those things will have to come through the legislative process, but it's going to be fascinating, and we'll definitely touch base with you again in the near future. Casey Harper, reporter at the Center Square, watching what's going on at our beloved institutions over in Washington, D.C., which we're coming up on the 250th anniversary. We can go into all that history some other time, Casey. Greatly appreciate it, as
Thanks,
always. We'll talk again soon. It is Illinois in Focus Daily here each and every weekday morning. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us as we break down all that you need to know to get your day started here with Illinois in Focus Daily.